Okay, so hello everyone and welcome along to another special edition of Susty Talk, Edie's ongoing series of video interviews put together to keep our audience of sustainability and energy professionals talking, feeling connected and optimistic through what is now the second lockdown here in the UK and beyond, hopefully much shorter than the first one, but you never know. I'm Edie's content editor, Matt Mace, and as mentioned, this is a slightly different approach to our Susty Talk series. We're well into the swing of Net Zero November, which has seen us publish an array of content focused on the net zero transition that included our wildly successful Net Zero Live virtual event last week. And to build on that momentum, we're extending our Susty Talk video format into a panel discussion, very much focused on net zero and the fact that if things hadn't have been derailed in 2020 by a pandemic, we would have come out of COP26, a crucial climate summit, of course, where the hope is we can get a raised ambitions in terms of a global deal, a global agreement on climate change. And to mark that occasion, you'll see I've been joined by not one, but three guests for this discussion. So joining me today, we have Sean Spires, the Executive Director of the Green Alliance. Hi, Sean. We have Suzanne Hooper, who is on the Chapter Zero Steering Committee. Hi, Suzanne.
Hello.
And Ramiro Fernandez, who is Director of Climate Change, and I hope I pronounced this right, Fundación Avin, and the Policy Advisor to the UNFCCC's High Level Champions. Hi, Ramiro.
Hi, Matt. Nice meeting you.
So thank you all for joining me today for this discussion. So yeah, as mentioned, we're a little under a year away now from COP26, which of course is due to take place earlier this month. So for this session, we're going to kind of gauge how ready we feel nations and businesses are for that crucial summit and what kind of needs to happen over the next 12 months or so to ensure that that summit basically is viewed as a success. We'll get into the intricacies of that shortly, but I think to start with, it'd be great to have our three panelists introduce themselves a bit more than I did, a bit about their role and how confident they're feeling in this 12-month build up to COP26, whether that's from a global policy level, current decarbonisation levels, or just from the business appetite for this to succeed. So we'll go to Sean first.
Hello, I'm Sean Spears, Executive Director of Green Alliance, which is a think tank working for ambitious leadership on the environment. One of the projects we've got is called Cutting Carbon Now, and it's about trying to get the UK government to put in place policies and spending commitments which will enable it to go into COP26 with a kind of clear platform that is not only talking about net zero, but it actually knows how to get there, and everybody sort of sees the pathway to getting there. And we're some way short of that now. I hope by the end of the year, with the spending review and other initiatives coming, we'll be in a much better position to not only sort of say we've signed up to net zero, but actually to show that we know how to achieve it.
Yeah, it feels weird that we're 6 weeks away essentially from the end of 2020, but we're still waiting on so much to come that could really shape what happens in the future. Brilliant, thank you for that very much, Sean. Up next we have Susan Hooper.
Hi, yes, I'm Susan Hooper. I am here as a founding director of Chapter Zero, which is an organisation that has dedicated itself to increasing awareness of the business implications of climate change. So to provide knowledge on the issues, as well as toolkits and frameworks, we deliver seminars and modules for members. We give access to pools of experts, and we have a network of other board directors, which has proven really useful. And the goal is simply to ensure high quality, effective boardroom debates and decisions on this topic. But I'm also here because I sit on several boards, and I have done so for over 20 years. I currently sit on the boards of Uber UK, the Rank Group and Affinity Water, and I chaired two startups, one in Edinburgh and CareSourcer, and one in Australia, which is enhanced biomass sequestration, so very close to my heart on Chapter Zero. And why I am excited, I would say, at first I wasn't when we had to delay COP26. But I have to say the world's moved on significantly. It already had done prior to the cancellation. But I think the thing that excites me most on this is that we are getting a new government in the US. And I think I'm pretty sure that they will be at the table with us. And I think having them at the table will make a significant difference. I also think we've had a lot of traction over the past year. And that with the momentum on the topic to investor activism, consumer activism, and many started to have significant wins, us showing them for the first time. We didn't have these kind of, what do you call them, sort of gold standards to talk about, and we now are starting to have that. So I think we're in a better place as a result of it. We still have lost a year, but we've got greater momentum, and that has to be positive.
No, definitely momentum there, I think, has been key, especially in the response to the pandemic, which we'll touch on shortly. So thank you for that, Susan. And of course, Ramiro Fernandez.
Hi, thanks, Matt. Pleasure to be here. As you mentioned, I'm policy advisor of the high-level champions, and part of that role is to be in the coordination team of the Race to Zero campaign, which is a campaign to engage business, investors, cities, and subnational governments to join the Climate Ambition Alliance, which was launched in September last year in the Secretary General's Climate Summit, inviting national governments and different actors of society to commit to net zero targets by 2050. And so we're seeing a lot of exciting going on the Race to Zero campaign. And if you ask me about COP26, what I'm really excited about, I think we can make COP26 a turning point and the moment in history in which all actors of society are aligned under the goals of the Paris Agreement. And we start what we call the decade of implementation to halve our emissions by 2030 and increase resilience substantially for the next 10 years. So I think it's a unique opportunity and momentum building, as the other speakers said, on the road to Glasgow now.
Great, no, great points there, Ramiro. So momentum, resilience, already some of the key themes coming from these intros here, which is great to see. So yeah, once again, thank all three of you for taking time out to have this discussion with me today. So yeah, as I mentioned, I feel like if we had recorded this discussion even just a few weeks ago, the outlook, the optimism that you've just shared might be a bit different. As you know, we've had some promises on the vaccine, and while it's good not to get our hopes up, there seems to be kind of light at the end of the tunnel for what's been a tough period for everyone. And then more kind of aligned to the climate aspect, as mentioned, the US is likely to re-enter the Paris Agreement, have a seat at the table, set its own net zero target, follow the likes of China and South Korea that have committed to doing so recently. And of course, this week we're expecting UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson to roll out part of, if not all of, a kind of 10-point plan to help the UK get to net zero emissions. We're expecting the ban on new sales of diesel and petrol, for example, to be moved forward another 5 years to 2030. So yeah, just in this last week, it's amazing how the dial is starting to turn a little bit. And while things are looking up, it's undoubtedly the case that the pandemic has had an impact on the net zero transition, whether that's at a corporate level, whether that's at a city level, whether that's at a national policy or global policy level. I'd like to get the panelists' thoughts on what has been some of the key impacts of the pandemic and how it's changed the focus on the net zero transition. Because when we at edie learned about the kind of first lockdown, we were, I suppose we were quite surprised about how sustainability and climate action remained a key focal point throughout all the discussions, whether that was in response to the pandemic or how business would respond. We thought it would slide down the agenda. It perhaps hasn't seemed like it has, but I'd like to get your thoughts on that now. So if Sean, perhaps if we start a view on that one.
Yeah, I just want to raise a slightly miserable point before we sort of celebrate the vaccine and getting the pandemic under control, which is to say that Brexit is still going potentially really badly, and that's going to have a big impact on business. So if we get a deal with the European Union, we're likely to see growth at about 3.7% below trend rate, essentially. And if we don't get a deal, it's likely to be around 6% or more. The last government in 2018, the official government estimate was 7.8% impact on growth. So there's going to be a lot less money for UK business to play with for some of the ambitious, tech-focused, clean growth strategies that we'd like to see. So the pandemic is serious and has had an impact, but everybody seems to have willfully forgotten Brexit, probably because they're bored silly with it. but Brexit is happening and it's going to have an impact on this stuff. We just need to be aware of that, I think.
No, yeah, great point. I think it's that kind of almost that one problem at a time type aspect, especially when the problems are as big as those two aspects, the pandemic and Brexit. So yeah, tough times ahead. I think the UK is in a good place where a lot of the technologies have matured, but not all of them in that sense. Ramiro, we'll go and come to you next.
Yeah, just to share from a more global perspective and the trends we are seeing on the Race to Zero campaign, we are very optimistic on that perspective, I have to say. And we are seeing, we have today now more than over 1,000 companies, 2050, more than 400 cities, investors representing over $5 trillion in assets committed to be net zero by 2050. So, and we saw this growing substantially in the middle of the pandemic. So our impression it is, first, there are a few lessons that we take out of COVID-19 that are very important, and I think they even enable the conditions for net zero commitments to grow, to get even bigger. One is related to how we acknowledge and understand a crisis, as we did with COVID-19, and how we really work when we're under urgency, how we can make really hard and difficult decisions. No? And this is very important for the climate crisis. The second is how we can rethink and we understand that we can make things different. We're very much on the sort of a business as usual track before, I would say, and it would be very difficult to make the level of radical transformations that we need in the next decade if we wouldn't have the experience of global lockdown as we had. And third is the role of governments on the recovery processes. The decisions that governments will take in the recovery process, it can truly enable and accelerate this transition for net zero on the next decade. So those are three key learnings that we have to accelerate the net zero from the COVID and for the next part of it. So we are optimistic about how we are getting out of this pandemic, I would say, from the global perspective.
No, great points. I think it was UNEP that states that emissions are going to have to kind of fall by 7.6% annually globally, and just through the pandemic and lockdown, we're expecting 2020 emission levels to be 8% lower. So that kind of gives an idea of the levels of disruption that are required. Obviously, not that a different way to deliver that is obviously required. So yeah, that new, given that almost forcing businesses into a new way of thinking, I suppose, is a really key point. And Susan, I imagine Zero and the work you guys are doing with your business community, I imagine has climate change been a kind of central theme to this discussion still, or have you seen it starting to slip down the agenda somewhat?
Yeah, well, to be perfectly honest, we were worried that it would. I mean, it was very unclear at the outset how it would, but I actually believe that COVID's been a real wake-up call for us all in various ways. And from a business perspective, in spite of all the work that we've done in the past on enterprise risk management, so ERM systems, almost every single company I know of missed the massive importance and risk to their business of a pandemic. And pandemics are a known risk. I mean, we know about them. We've had them for years, in fact, but we've never built into our models something that would have actually had the devastating effect that it has had on our economies. And now we've got a second known risk with climate change. And given the impact that COVID has had on the economy, I think it would be a really short-sighted business person to not incorporate concrete planning on this topic going forward. Equally, in many cases, businesses have suffered tremendous setbacks because of COVID. And as a consequence, there have been some serious restructuring and reorganizations, which is rather perversely actually an opportunity to look at doing things differently. And I really changes thrust upon us, but we've adapted and moved forward. And the reality is, as a result of COVID and as a result of the activity on climate change over the last years, customer habits are now significantly changing. You know, people are making different choices about the way they travel, if they travel at all, commuting, working from home versus the office, going to large gatherings. All of this creates opportunities to rethink how we do business. And my experience is that it is now much more at the forefront than even before. And people are, of course, aware that there is no vaccine for climate change. So there's no point in just sitting at home and waiting. We're actually going to have to do something differently. And all of this, I think, is playing out more positively. I do buy this point about Brexit. It is, but to me, it's a further systems challenge. And with every challenge that we've had in terms of the change of the way we do business, we are forced to learn different ways of doing it. And I fear, you can't wait for a crisis to make you try out all the new technology that already exists. And optimist, I'm hoping that with the Brexit crisis or challenge, let's say, that we will do the same.
No, it's great points there. Susan. Sean, I see you want to come back in on this point.
Well, yes, after my sort of miserable diatribe about Brexit, I do want to support what Ramiro and Susan have said, that businesses I speak to and which Green Alliance works with are very up for this challenge and actually see there's no alternative. The world is going low carbon. There's a huge business opportunity, even if you didn't care about the climate. There's a huge business opportunity arising from countries becoming Paris compliant, and I hope Glasgow compliant in a year or two's time, and it would be foolish to be left behind. And I think that's recognised in boardrooms, across the world, but also across the UK.
Okay, and Ramiro?
Yeah, just to second that Sean's message, because as he said, now the business opportunity is there, and you mentioned today we need to cut our emissions as we did this year. Doing it in a positive way from the economy perspective, creating jobs, creating new jobs, and accelerating the transition. That's the way we need to do it, and that's the way we want to do it. And this sort of business opportunity that we are realizing and we are seeing in the middle of the pandemic is also seconded by the level of engagement or commitment that we're starting to see from national governments. As you said, I mean, a month ago, our analysis would be different, but not only because the result of US elections, and because the incoming president already said that he will get a net zero target by 2050 and make climate change a key pillar of the recovery, but also because you had Japan committing to be net zero by 2050 and 3 weeks ago, South Korea making the same pledge, and China's commitment, even before the result of the US election, committing to become net zero before 2060. And China is a country that has a track record of overachieving their own targets and their own commitments. So the chances that we can get the major emitter in the world to become carbon neutral before 2060, and I like to think this is going to be 2051, 2051, it is a massive political sign to all actors of society. So I think we are truly entering in a new turning point, and next year, the new incoming presidency of the US, this will just accelerate. So it's a unique opportunity towards Glasgow now.
No, brilliant points from all the panelists there, and it brings me nice onto the next part I want to discuss, which is this Boris Johnson last week kind of kick-started this year-long countdown to COP, and we're expecting some more UK aspects there, but we've got the pledges coming into the table now, as Ramiro mentioned, the US, China, Japan, the UK's own, obviously, net zero commitment hasn't yet been backed up by a strategy. It's on the way, but there's already been some discrepancy, some decisions that suggest that net zero isn't perhaps truly embedded into all the political thinking. Sean, I know the Green Alliance report from last week kind of says that there's like a more than £11 billion investment gap in terms of infrastructure policy aligned to net zero, for example. So in this year, what's the kind of key things that we need to see change, whether that's from a policy level, whether that's from a business level and how they operate, to ensure that we actually do bounce back better and that we don't do what happened during the last financial crash of 2008-2009, where we did lock in fossil fuels into a future economy. I don't know who wants to come in onto that first. Yeah, Sean.
So there's a huge long list, but I'll say three things from a UK perspective. One is that all government departments must be pushing in the same direction. So we've had laggard departments. We've had the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government that's been pretty hopeless on this agenda for ages. And we're still putting public money into building homes that will need to be retrofitted in a few years' time. So that's got to change. The Department for Transport appears to be changing much faster than one would have anticipated with the net zero plan for transport, which is great. I think the Treasury is the real problem. I mean, looking at the briefing in the weekend papers, the Treasury can't say it's growth against the environment. They've got to stop that frame and show they're fully behind it, because they are a kind of really important department. So all departments pushing in the same direction is one. Secondly, a net zero test for all new public spending, and certainly for new expenditure of new infrastructure, which is the point you were making from our report last week, that there's a big investment gap in low carbon infrastructure, but that we're also still putting a lot of money into, say, building 4,000 miles of new roads. Where does that fit in a £27 billion road programme? So net zero test for all infrastructure, I think, is really important. And thirdly, it's the net aspect of this. It's not just about decarbonising, it's also about storing carbon. And we need to get really serious about nature-based solutions and tie the two together and really buy this frame of the twin crisis. It's a crisis of nature and of climate, and you can't solve the one without the other. And I sometimes think the nature crisis is the poor relation to the climate crisis, as indeed the CBD COP appears to be slightly the poor relation to the COP26 in Glasgow. And the two have got to go in tandem, really. Yeah,
I think that's been another disappointing aspect of the pandemic. There was a lot of talks happening at the start of the year about how the CBD COP and the UNFCCC COP would kind of twin those two issues together. Whether those negotiations resurface, I'm not sure. I like the mention in the report that net zero kind of almost like a stress test for policy, and I imagine there's a similar application for businesses. So Suzanne, I'd like to bring you in terms of at a corporate level. How do we ensure that business is important, because they don't go back to that business as usual, and that there is this long-term resiliency planned through business regardless of sector and size?
Well, I've already mentioned that I've seen for the first time several companies that have started on this issue already a number of years ago, making a positive impact in terms of getting to net zero and even to net negative, which is a new introduction. But my observation from my point of view on boards is that the single biggest hurdle to companies embracing a new way of doing business is having an informed strategy to address their specific impact on climate change. And not just that, but having that embedded into their corporate strategy. So not an extra page in their annual report, but it's their corporate strategy. It's that integration of the two. We often have these, we keep getting thrown, now you've got to do this, you've got to do D&I, and you've got to do, gender pay gap, and you've got to do this, and we just add more pages into the annual report. This has got to be front and center of the corporate strategy. And to be honest, there's still striking lack of awareness of the fundamentals, such as your current baseline or footprint of an organization. Where do you need to focus first as a priority in order to set up the company on the right trajectory to this transition? All of which, it's impossible to have a meaningful plan in place to navigate over the next 10 to 30 years to net zero. And we won't be around in 30 years to know whether the plans were right or not. So personally, I feel that the momentum in businesses within the UK is not anywhere near where it needs to be to enable an orderly transition. And so I'm picking up a bit on the point that Sean just made too, is it's incumbent upon business to lobby for more government involvement, not to mention, putting all the departments pushing in one direction. That would be a travesty if they weren't. But businesses need to make sure that the policies and requirements for performance exist in an even playing field for their industry. And not just some of the businesses move in the same direction and at speed. They need the clear leadership from government that is missing at the moment, and hopefully that will come. Maybe next week we'll give a different kind of webinar, but the overall ambition for the economy that aligns with their own aims. So the announcement that government's going to publish a net zero strategy is brilliant, a run up to COP. I think one thing we haven't mentioned, though, and you've touched upon it with the nature-based carbon solutions, is that the climate crisis has released the innovative juices of thousands of entrepreneurs. and they are working on opportunities that will make significant positive change to the environment, be it to do with zero carbon technology, carbon sequestration, water preservation, new agricultural techniques. Business needs to work out how to create funds for investments. And I know that flies in the face of that point about Brexit, but these are opportunities that will aid in their transition. And if you don't get the investment there, it's going to be a challenge, not just for those opportunities, but also for the companies. So it's a new way of looking at running a business and making it resilient for the future. So not without its challenges. I think in hearing what you've just said, though, there's one last point I would make there, which I hadn't thought about before, which is, I call it the mental medicine. You need a new kind of leadership now. And I'm not talking, you need to go to business school now for it. You need both boards and execs who are willing to take risks, because a lot of this is unprecedented. We don't have examples of how it's going to be done. How do you, when you've had an economic crisis, funds to invest in technology which is going to help you 30 years down the line? We don't know it. So you need people who are going to be really brave about taking decisions and making calls and leading their organizations through all this. And you need boards who give them the leeway to do that. That in and of itself is new as well. I'll leave it there.
No, there's some great points there. And I eagerly anticipate those businesses that do come forward, the, I suppose, less risk adverse, the ones that do figure out a way to balance the issues they're facing today with the need for long-term resiliency. Ramiro, we'll come to you now as well.
Sure, thanks, Matt. Just complementing from someone that is not from the UK and this global perspective again. I think if you ask what is need to happen in the next 12 months, my first priority would be related to how we ensure that we connect and we link the recovery packages that national governments are setting in place with the climate policies, with the NDC enhancement, with the long-term strategies. And the UK had a pioneering role. They lead the way on the net zero commitment before. And I think the UK is particularly very positioned in a very unique place right now, with becoming the leadership of the COP26 incoming presidency and also the G7, and working in partnership with Italy on the pre-COP and Italy joining the G20. Because what we need right now, it is to strengthen global cooperation, the global multilateralism again, in a way as we haven't seen it probably since after Second World War, when we set up these massive Marshall plans on recoveries. That's the level of ambition and government leadership that we also need on the recovery phases. And there is a place there to play, and there's still a vacuum on global leadership there, that someone will do it. And I think there is an opportunity there for the UK to do it according where it is. And the other element that I just want to reinforce, because both Sean and Susan mentioned the interlinkage between the nature and climate crisis and how they are all together. I couldn't endorse this more, and the importance of ensuring that we address the climate crisis while also restoring nature at the same time. We're having these 2 weeks, the Race to Zero dialogues in different states, and one of the speakers was saying last week under the Nature-Based Solutions event that net zero is nothing more than just a signpost on the road to the regenerative economy that we need to create. And I like it how it sounds, because we truly need to transform our economy into a more regenerative, that we restore nature, and we reframe the agriculture into a regenerative agriculture, as many other areas of dealing with nature. So I think we are moving into that direction. We just need to speed up a lot in the next years to come.
Yeah, it's been, as a journalist covering this field for just over 5 years now, even in that short time, it's been amazing to see the transition from what was essentially iterative measures to decarbonize, especially amongst businesses. We'll do a 10% reduction over the next 10 years because it sounds nice, to this more science-based aspect, to this birth of net zero, and now even as Susan mentioned as well, the few companies that are now looking at carbon negative, Microsoft for example, and the next frontier. It's been great to see that evolve, and I think that's kind of kept the optimism flowing through what's been a really challenging period at a political level, at a societal level as well. And it's great that we've got 3 speakers here that can cover policy, business, and kind of the global aspect of it as well. It's a nice little cocktail, and I think it's been interesting from a UK perspective to see Boris Johnson hand the keys to that international development to former, Secretary of States for DFID, basically, in Alex Sharma, and I mean Anne-Marie Trevelyan for her. It's clear that they're focusing on that international outreach, which was perhaps one area that's going to be crucial to COP26, given the voices to those island states, for example. And I feel like there's some early signs that there's a willingness to do that. Obviously, the hard work starts now, and that kind of brings me on to my next point, and that's what we want to see happen at this COP26. And the year we have to get there. I mean, obviously we want this I think Glasgow agreement as it would be penned would be great, but what does that entail, and is there any kind of thing that would have to change that just hasn't been kind of breached before? We saw, that the Paris Agreement did what other COPs failed to do. What in the build up to COP26, is there any kind of big milestones that you think, whether that's global cooperation, national policy, business level, that you think this is what will make a successful COP? Again, I'm going to throw that out to whoever wants to come in.
I don't think I think we've touched on that actually already. It is about global cooperation, but actually what's interesting in listening to all this is I mean, one of the benefits of the work I'm doing at the moment with Chapter Zero is that you do have an overview of business, government, but also internationally as well, because we've set up about 18 other chapters as well. And what I keep on hearing is great ideas out there, either in business or in innovations, but they can't get in their own country the attention, the support, the focus. But what's happening is rather than national, initiatives, you're getting international initiatives happening where, this business I'm working with in Australia struggles in Australia to get the government's attention, and they have a political challenge with the term climate change. But we've been working with them and find them funders in Switzerland and the US and in the UK. And I just think that we are in the process of also having to think about this differently. This is a great opportunity for the UK, for all the points that were just mentioned about the presidency of the G7, leading in the climate change negotiations. Knew that, in Brexit, we have an opportunity to have new economic relations with trading partners too. So we are in a unique place at the moment to coordinate and deliver this global response. And I just think that we need to all stay open-minded and not expect it to go along the same railroad tracks that it has done in the past. But things are different now. You still have populism out there, meaning some countries aren't going to come with you, but you've got ideas in those countries that you need to somehow grasp and bring in to the discussion. So yeah, I feel excited about it, but I also think we often fall victim to doing things the way we've always done them. And actually we're being presented with yet another seismic change, an opportunity to do things differently and speed up the momentum that we've all categorically said is not near where it needs to be to get to your 7% per annum reduction in emissions.
No, yeah, it's a great point then. Ramiro, I'll bring you in now as well.
Again, I think, as I said at the beginning, Glasgow is the opportunity to align all actors of society with the Paris Agreement goals. And this is important because it took us almost more than 20 years to reach that agreement. And that agreement is very clear in telling us what we need to do to address the climate crisis on time, and what we need to do back to back with what science is telling us. So I think what we need is to have cities, business, investors, region, civil society, all of them committing with a long-term goal, which is net zero by 2050 at the latest, and hopefully before, to define interim plans, interim targets, hopefully at 2030, to be fair ambitious, to set up a plan for doing that, and to commit to report on the advance and the progress they're making on these plans. This is the structure. This is the sort of the ratchet up Paris Agreement mechanism. And this is what we replicated in the Race to Zero campaign to ensure that we have all actors of society setting up the same mechanisms to reach the goals of the Paris Agreement. I think that is, and this is how it should be reflected in today, in the 21st century, how we understand and how we see multilateralism. It's not just about top-up national governments making commitments, but getting all actors of society cooperating and supporting national governments to reach these goals and agreements. My impression of what should happen in the next 12 months and what we are going to foresee, and to reach Glasgow and see a completely very different COP of what we've seen before, much more of an implementation COP and much more related to an ambition and action than just negotiation. We already negotiated everything what we need to negotiate. Now it's time to implement.
No, great points. And I think the coronavirus pandemic, even though it didn't target anyone, it did affect kind of communities disproportionately based on essentially their wealth. And there's a danger that this, I suppose, whether it's the impacts of climate change or even just the transition to a low carbon economy, could have those societal imbalances as well. So the just transition, as it's being called, I think will be a key aspect of this past year. I'm wary that we've been discussing for a while and we could continue for ages, but I do want to start bringing things to a close. And so as a final question would probably be for the sustainability and energy professionals that are working within businesses that are watching this, if you could give them one key piece of advice, bearing in mind that the next, 2021 is shaping up to be what 2020 was muted to be by the government, that year of climate action, where all the policies start to hopefully align, the dial starts to shift. What would your advice be to the sustainability and energy teams at businesses to make sure that they make the most of this transition? Again, I think if we go to Sean first on that one.
In the UK context, I say that they're beyond the obvious point of getting on with it themselves and their businesses. I think what's really important is talking to the Treasury about how this makes good business sense as well as political sense and climate sense and so on. The Treasury listens to business in a way that I'm afraid it doesn't even listen to Green Alliance. So talk to the Treasury and tell them that you want a policy framework which enables businesses to do the right thing.
Great stuff. Thanks, Sean. We'll go to Ramiro next.
I would definitely suggest for them to embrace this transition and set up their goals and target as soon as possible, to change their business plans to be aligned with climate, and also, as Sean said, to advocate for the policy reform that they need for that, in particularly the recovery packages that are going to be defined. That's going to structure and will define our ability or not to make this transition in the next decade. That decisions will be taken on the recovery packages. So that's a priority.
Brilliant, thank you, Maria. Yeah, real advocacy theme emerging here, which is good to hear. And Suzanne, last words from you then as well.
Yeah, well, I guess I speak from to board directors on this one, saying, insist, show me the plan, get in outside experts to help scope your current baseline, identify the innovations out there to help transition to net zero way of doing business. But board directors need to make sure that they are climate competent and they're up to steam on issues. They need to educate themselves in order to do that. A small plug, Chapter Zero is exactly there for that. There's a climate change boardroom toolkit, which people can just download, and it's sort of a instant strategy document in terms of what you need to know. And if you don't know that, you've got some problems. So show me the plan. That's the last thing I would say.
No, brilliant. 3 great bits of advice there for our audience to hopefully take and form in a way that works for them. But yeah, I'd like to thank Sean, Ramiro, and Suzanne for your time today. It's been a great discussion and full of optimism, which I think is much required after the year that's happened. So thank you to all 3 of you. And yeah, this Susty Talk, as mentioned, it's part of a month-long program of content from edie that's brought to you in association with our headline partner, EDF Energy. So Net Zero November, that is. Just a load of tailored content, whether that's panels like this, Net Zero Live happened last week, podcasts, interviews and features all around the transition to net zero. So if that's an area your business is focused on, do check out the site. In the article accompanying this video, there'll be links with all the information you'll need on that as well. But in the meantime, though, stay safe, stay positive, and keep up the Susty Talk.